Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I am Siofra Bradigan. So, before we get started, happy solstice to, or summer solstice to everyone in the northern hemisphere, and happy winter solstice to everyone who's in the southern hemisphere. So, I'm sure everyone has had a busy weekend and trying to figure out what to do with the new moon and all the other stuff. But I would like to talk about spell work today because that's definitely a subject a lot of people have questions about and wonder whether to do it or not, whether they need to do it or not, whether they want to do it or not, and then how do you do it. So for me in the beginning, it wasn't my focus in particular, although I did my first sort of spontaneous spell probably in the early 70s. I was reading Bonowitz's book, Real Magic, which was a very interesting read at the time. And he had listed some spells that were folklore about things that worked in his book. And one of the things that they had mentioned was if you have an unwelcome guest, you can put a broom in the corner of the room where they are, and they'll leave within 10 minutes. It lets them know they're not welcome. And I had just finished reading that, and we had a pretty crazy house at the time. It was in the early 70s, so we're talking there was a lot of drugs and other stuff going on in our household on a regular basis, every weekend kind of thing. And one day this guy came over and he was extra specially weird that day. He was putting off this really strange vibe, saying very strange things. I don't know what he was on. I'm pretty sure he was on something, but I don't know what. But he started giving me the willies and creepy kind of willies. And I was sitting in the living room at the time, and all of a sudden I thought, okay, I'm going to put a broom in the corner and see if this works. And I got up and went into the kitchen and just grabbed a kitchen broom and walked into the living room and just put the broom in the corner and sat down. And I was astonished by how fast it worked. From the moment I put the broom in the corner, he became paranoid. Then he thought we were narcs, and he thought that our house was being surrounded by narcs, and that he was going to be arrested, and he had to get the hell out of our house, like now, before this happened. And I'd say less than 5 minutes, and he was out the door. So that was sort of an impressive thing to me. That was like, well, this seems such a simple thing to do, but my assumption about how this works is the fact that one, I was told that it worked, so I believed that it worked, even though I wasn't completely sure. It was like they planted the notion in my head that if I put a broom in the corner, then an unwelcome guest, which he was definitely one, would get up and leave. And I think on a subconscious or unconscious level, all of us are connected together. And so that belief that I had in what this spell would do, or what this action would do, influenced him on that level and created the result. So I wasn't raising energy or doing anything like that. It was just a very instantaneous, sort of spontaneous happening. Most of the time it's not like that. You have to do a lot more preparation and have a base of knowledge, associations, and all this other stuff. So, in an instant, in a situation where you need something fast, sometimes the small actions, so long as you believe what the result is going to be, can work. That would be working just with your intentions and your will. Not something you should do all the time because that's kind of exhausting, but anyway. So in thinking about other spells that I felt I've needed to do, I only really do spell work if a situation comes up that I think I need some magical assistance with. And to be clear, you always need to do all of the real world stuff around what you're trying to accomplish before you do the spell and after you do the spell, whatever it is. I personally don't recommend like love spells because the possibility of sort of invading someone's free will and then not having real love because it's something else is problematic. Just about all of us have tried that at least once, me included, and the results are never what you want. At least I have not met anyone who has done that and gotten the actual real love that they were looking for or thought they were looking for. So when you're deciding to do spell, you need to look at your situation and see what does it need. Like if you're having problems in a relationship, you might want to go to a marriage counselor or private counseling to help yourself. Maybe before you pull out your spell book and try and figure out if there's a way to change the situation, because generally if there's a problem in a relationship, it's communication based, misunderstanding. And so you think about what it is that you might need. So let's see, some of the spells I felt I needed to do and that worked really well. One was just before my husband and I met. I was living with Aaron, and he was a pagan and a witch. And I thought, when we got together, I finally found someone who gets me. Yeah, well, some pagans are crazy too, so it's not the only criteria one should use. And he deserted me and my daughter, left us stranded in a city without a transportation. He took the car and left the state, called me on the phone and said he wasn't coming back, which was annoying, and I was very angry. And I yelled a lot, and called him coward and all sorts of other names, and stomped around the house. But I have a personal rule that when I'm extremely upset, it's not a good time to do magic. And even not a good time to write a letter to someone that you're really, really mad at. So I have my own personal 3-day rule, and I figure I sit with whatever it is for about 3 days so I can calm down a little bit and get some perspective and then come up with a plan of action and then decide to follow through with it. And that has served me well. May not work for everybody, but it definitely works for me, and my responses are more considered than they would be on the fly. Although in an emergency on the fly, I can pretty much put somebody on the ground instantaneously because I have that kind of energy if it's an emergency. But we're not talking about those. We're talking about this. So we had gotten married. He and I did a hand fasting on Beltane when we joined together. We did a maypole together. We had 7 colors, one for each of us, a set for each of us, and then we wound those strands of our life energy and our future and all this other stuff together on the maypole. And I had the maypole. When he left, he didn't take that with him. He took a few odd things, but that wasn't one of them. And he left a bunch of stuff behind, and I was really feeling betrayed, to say the least, and definitely angry about the whole situation, but realized it was probably for the best. He was bipolar, and he didn't want to be on medication to control that. He thought I was trying to kill him. And basically that's what he said. If he stayed with me, he'd have to kill himself. So it's probably a good thing he left, because that would not have been fun if someone's had that happen to them, I am so sorry. I cannot imagine how horrible that would be. So I'm glad he left for so many reasons. But I was, we had ritually combined our energies together and joined together. And that is a significant thing to do with somebody, in my opinion. It's like I needed to undo it. So I designed a way to undo it that would make me happy. And he had made a couple of statues of God and Goddess statue out of some clay that we bought at the store. He never fired the clay, so it was still, it was hard and dry, but it wasn't like set. So it was still potentially malleable. And so I took the 2 statues that he made and I basically crumbled them all up and added water to them and created a poppet, a figure of him to represent him. And this is part of these kinds of spells. It's like it's your association with the material and with naming it between the worlds, so it represents the thing you're trying to affect. And so I wanted a puppet of him that I could work with and figure out what to do about. So I created that, and ironically, he had left a bunch of stuff. He had a collection of his wisdom teeth. I had his wisdom teeth, and I had fingernail clippings, belly button lint. If ever a witch had everything she ever needed to have to be able to do a really nasty thing to somebody, I had it. And I knew that was a potential thing that I was risking figuring out what to do about it. So I was trying to be cautious about the results that I was going to get. And I thought long and hard about what do I want. And what I want is I want his energy out of me and out from around me. I don't want to have any strands, links, connections, bonds, or whatever with him anymore, to the point where I don't even think I want to reincarnate and have him hanging around. It's like, I'm done. That's it. Cross the line, can't cross back. That's the end of it. So I built the poppet, and I put in the items that were particularly him, like the teeth, etc. He left some stones and so forth behind, and I put them in there. They were some of his magical objects. And we had a heart box. Inside the heart box, we had pictures of ourselves and some other items. In fact, I think that's where the teeth and stuff were. After I used them, I took that box. It was like a china, made out of china, and I smashed it with a hammer, and I put the broken pieces into the bottom. I used a glass pie plate for this. And I put the broken pieces of our heart relationship or whatever in the bottom to represent the shattering of the promises and so forth there. And then I unwound all of the ribbons from the maypole. I unwound the whole thing, separated out the sets of strands, 7 for him, 7 for me. And the different colors of the chakras is what we used. And then I took one set and declared that this was my set. This represented my energy. And I actually made a headdress, a small little hairdress thing to use for myself, to sort of claim my power back from the relationship. And then I used his to make binding cords around him to keep him from harming me or anyone close to me, and from harming himself, because I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And you could have some question about ethics about that. If someone really wants to harm themselves, who are you to tell them not to? But that's what I did. And you have to decide. You have to make your choices. And the main thing was to give him all of his energy back and to separate the two of us from one another. And then I put that thing that I created, and I put it on the balcony in the apartment buildings where we lived. And the rain and the wind came and dissolved it. And it melted away. And there was just a few little things left in the bottom. And one of the things was an Australian fire opal that he had. And it was a pretty good sized one, about like that. And I looked at that and I thought, you know what? I'm going to keep that as representing taking my power back from this. Now I'm taking his object and making it mine. So now this belongs to me. And so, sort of like a power object. And I actually mounted it on my staff. And it stayed on my staff for a long time until one day it finally cracked. And then I knew that I was done with that, and I replaced it with a pink opal that I put there myself. So that's what's there now. And so, that's an example of a situation and designing a spell around it to work with my unconscious and subconscious and work with my energy field and everything else. Everyone's going to be a little bit different in how they approach this, but that's a good example. And like with poppets, whether they're clay or they're fabric, one of the main things is naming them between the worlds. You can use them for different types of spells. You can do healing spells with them. They don't have to be negative. You can also do other things. And, putting their name on it, putting their signature inside of it. If you have a copy of their signature, a picture on their face, you can look a lot of this stuff up. But again, you have to decide what is the right thing for you to do. So that was one thing that I did. And around the same time, it was right after Ian and I met, actually, came the first anniversary of my father's death. He died in 1990, which was a huge relief for me. I was surprised at how much of a relief it was, and hadn't realized I'd been scanning every male face I ever saw up until that point, making and comparing every man's face to my father's face to make sure he wasn't there. And when he was dead and I knew he was dead, I stopped doing it. And the lack of doing it made it obvious that I had been doing it. It was one of those weird things. So it was very interesting. But my father never acknowledged what he did and never took responsibility for his own actions. He basically said we were just looking for somebody to blame, and so, and he didn't remember any of it. And I realized at that point that I had an opportunity, because I do work with spirits that have crossed over, and not everyone's going to want to do this or be able to do this, but this is something I did do. And so on the anniversary, the 1 year anniversary of his death, I called him forth from the other side, and I laid some ground rules, or I don't know exactly what to call them. So we'll just tell you what I did. First, I told him that he wasn't allowed to reincarnate right away, because what we needed as his victims is for him to know what he did and to understand the impact that he had on us. So he couldn't finish crossing over the rest of the way until we were done talking about him. And from that moment on, every time I talked about him, he was there and I could feel him. And I told this to my sisters and my mother. So anybody who had stuff that they needed to process, they would be able to say it out loud and deal with it, and he would have to listen. So that was the first part of what I did. So the second part was, I did not, we have this idea in our heads about karma that's sort of really been ingrained in our society, where we don't actually understand karma's, the nature of real karma, that if you're bad in one life, then you have to come back and be hurt in another. So you're like being punished for something you did to someone else. My opinion is that that just perpetuates the cycle of violence, and then no one ever gets better. So there's always someone that you've hurt in another life, so someone has a right to come back and hurt you in this one, and on until there's nothing left. So I don't know how this word is pronounced. It's a Geas. I called it Geas, but I'm pretty sure that's not how it's pronounced, because I've never actually heard anyone say it. So if you know how it's pronounced, let me know. But what that is in Irish and Scottish tradition is like someone who is born with a compulsion, a task that they have to perform, something that they will never feel happy in the life that they're in unless that's what they're doing. And there's a lot of ancient myths about that, where the reluctant hero and so forth. So I placed on his spirit, so when he did reincarnate, when we were finished, that he would have to pick a healthy family so he would have a good childhood, a healthy, safe childhood. But he would feel compelled to work in the field of abuse, of child abuse, in order to help solve some of the problems that we have with that, to dedicate his life to helping people who are being abused and working in institutions to try and create better ways of solving this issue that we have around the world. Because I felt that that was a better outcome to that. And I felt good about that, and I still do. So several years down the road, interestingly enough, my mother and I both had a dream about him on the same night. And I always find that fascinating when that happens, because it's like she's on the East Coast, I'm over here. It's not like we talk every day. It's not like the subject of my father comes up or anything like that when we do talk. So he appeared to me in my dream, and he told me that he felt he had learned and understood what he had done, and he asked if he could be released to continue. And in my dream, I said, well, I'm going to have to check with everybody else first, because, it's not just about me. My mother said she was done with him. She didn't care. So I called her up on the phone, and then she told me her dream, and we compared notes. And I'm like, okay. And then I called my sister, and she says, no, I'm not done with him yet. I like knowing that he has to hear me every time I say something. So I'm like, okay. So I let it continue on for another several years. And then one day I just decided it was time to let him continue on and be born again, and do his part to try and fix the problem. So that was that. And this was an interesting thing for me, because I told this to one of our coven members a number of years ago, and I'm telling him about this is what I did, and he says, I don't think people can do that. And I'm like, but I just told you that I did that. So what does that mean? I'm a liar or I'm delusional, right? What else could it mean? And I find that this happens fairly often to me because I have such a weird head and I have such unusual experiences even compared to most people that are having unusual experiences that they're skeptical. And if you don't believe it, that's fine by me. But one thing you should know is I always tell as far as I can the absolute truth because for me that's my relationship with the universe. And if I don't do that, then I don't have the power that I have. I can't do the things that I do because the universe will not allow it to happen. It won't work. So for me, that's part of my personal ethics and whatever you want to term you want to call it is telling the absolute truth as well as I can. It doesn't mean I might not forget something because I'm human. This happens. So that's another thing. The other kind of spell though that I have done is a mirror box spell, and I've done that a couple of times because I thought it was necessary, and I don't do that lightly. I only do that if I feel like there's an extreme need, and I do that particular spell because in case if someone asks me to do it, I'm more reluctant to do it. If I'm doing it for myself, it's different because then I know all the information as well as I can. But basically, the mirror box spell starts with a poppet. I usually do fabric poppets for this because you want to make them handable. You wouldn't want to do like a giant thing like I did with his clay. And naming it between the worlds and so forth, and then putting the person in a mirrored box, and the mirror faces the poppet. So basically, it reflects everything back to the person, and I consider that a safety mechanism for the spell. Because if someone's asked me to do it and then they've lied and all the information they've given me is wrong, it reflects whatever that individual you put in the box is putting out. So if they've lied and they're putting out positive stuff, then they're just going to get an increase of positive energy coming towards them. But if they haven't lied, it sort of makes karma, either good or bad, happen quicker. So it sort of speeds up the process, so it doesn't take like maybe 10 lifetimes to get to it. It can happen maybe in this lifetime and get some learning or what have you. And you don't know for sure what sort of result it's going to have as far as that goes. So that's and when I do that, read the list, I call in like the Saturnian beings who are in charge of justice and karma, and figure out what's the correct thing to do. I don't decide what needs to happen. I leave it in their hands, and I read them the charges, is if you want to call it that, of what it is that this person has done or has supposedly done, and I figure they'll know if that's true or not, and then bury it in the ground. And I've done this a few times. I've actually gotten a doctor's license pulled because of harm he was doing to the community. That was sort of one of the side effects of that one. And another chiropractor lost his license for the same kind of thing. And, it's like, not like I'm running around burying boxes everywhere. So that's another thing I have done as I felt necessary. And again, I followed it up with real world things. Like I testified against the chiropractor at the chiropractic board. So I didn't just do that and then leave it, because I was actually a witness to some of the stuff that happened and felt it was an important enough thing to make sure that this was brought to light. And that's part of it too. It's like it makes the truth more apparent to other people. They see the person more clearly. So that's another kind of spell. I was thinking of another one while I was in there chattering, trying to think what it was. Oh, okay, so here's a more recent one as well. Now, my daughter lives in the same town that I do. She's a little bit far, she's a few miles away, but we're here in the same community. And she had a neighbor who moved in across the street who was paranoid and hallucinating and armed and was absolutely going nuts. He was like going outside with a loaded gun, pointing it at teenagers in the street. And since she lives in the county outside of the city limits, the sheriff's department has a different idea of whether that's okay or not, and all this other stuff. So I was starting to get concerned for her safety, especially after someone was actually hit in the head and knocked to the ground, and apparently the law enforcement had nothing they could do about it. So they just sort of, said if he's standing on his own property, he can do whatever he wants with a gun. And we're like, really? He can like point it at you and say he's going to shoot you? This is scary stuff. So I consider this self-defense, and I believe in self-defense. There's some people out there that think you should never do anything negative to anybody, everything sweetness and light, and you should always do the positive end of all things. I'm not one of those people. And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's fine. You don't have to do this. But I used some spells from the book. I brought this book out to show you guys. This is a book I recommend, 5,000 Spells Encyclopedia by Judica, Illes or Illes, Illes. And with this book, there's a lot of hoodoo kind of stuff in it. And like with everything else, it's a good resource, but you have to look at the spell, see what the intention of the spell is, what the probable result of the spell might be, and whether you would be comfortable with doing that to another person, and if that was the right thing to do. So, you have your own relationship with the universe, and you have to figure that out. So I looked for basic stuff for, there's stuff in here to try and make somebody move away, and I thought, I don't think I feel okay with that, because, then I'm just sending him to some other community to be a problem. I don't know that I have the authority to just decide that some other community should have to deal with this guy. So I decided against that. I decided on some basic protection stuff. And I came across a few things that were useful. First was printing up a picture of sort of a frightening visage, a frightening face of some kind. And I picked a picture of Medusa and printed that up, and then putting it on your front door facing out. So when it's inside your house, so here's your door, and you put the picture facing the door, so no one sees the picture, but the energy of the picture goes through the door, and someone who is potentially threatening to you or danger to you, or possible enemy of yours, or is wanting to cause you harm, will be frightened to go through your door. That's the idea, and it seems to work pretty well. So we did that. I did a basic boundary powder just with salt and pepper, mixing them together, and did a line on her side of the street and did across several houses, because he was threatening everybody on that side of the street, not just my daughter. And so we just went and visualized a wall of protection on that side of the street, and sort of like this is a boundary, this that we're setting, and you stay on your side and we'll stay on our side, and that's the way it is. And then I taught my daughter some more complete methods for actually casting protective circle around her property and putting up her own wards, and gave her instructions on how to use the pentagram and so forth, and we did that. And I like to get other people involved in what's going on. If it's going to happen, it's better to do it yourself than it is to have someone do it for you, because then you've got a skill that you can fall back on some other time. So we did all this, and the guys across the street hiding in his house, because it was very strange anyway. I don't even know if he was home when we did this. The very next morning, he started putting up an 8-foot tall wall all around his property. He just surrounded himself with a wall, which my granddaughter was like, wow, I can't believe this. The very next day, oh my goodness, it's amazing. And so we got an instant response again from the spell work that we did. He responded to it. It's pretty clear to the wall that we put up. We put up an invisible one, he put up a physical one. And then I think it was less than 2 months, and he sold the house and left. I don't know where he went. I wasn't trying to chase him away, but he did. He went anyway. So, that was whatever the universe decided, that was the way it was supposed to happen. So again, that's the thing is, what you're doing in spell work is you're creating that environment on the other planes. You're sort of putting it out there and creating a recipe for what you want to have happen, and put the energy into those ingredients. And then the universe, depending on your relationship, will respond to that, and it'll manifest itself either instantaneously or over time, or something new will come your way. So it's all the spells are going to be personal as far as what you understand. Because if you do stuff in spell work and you don't understand what it means and why it's there, it's not going to be as effective. Because it's all about the mental and astral plane. It's like, yeah, if you have that comprehension, that understanding of what this does or what this means. And more recently, I helped design a honey pot for a friend of mine. She did the spell itself, but I helped her figure out what to put in it and for the purpose that she wanted it to be. And so she was able to make her own choices and her own ethical decisions about how she wanted it, the thing to say and so forth. And she got instant results when she got to the point where she was ready to put it together. So, we know that this stuff can work. The thing is, it's not the most important part of what we do, in my opinion. The really most important part of what we do is becoming more who we are and evolving as human beings. Not some people get into magic because they think it's going to be like Charmed or Harry Potter or The Craft or whatever, and they can just like think and make their eye color change or make people fall in love with them or fly through the sky or but it isn't that. It's not really for that, and it's not like that. That's not the purpose of it. And some people get into it because they want to develop their psychic abilities, which is not a bad thing to want to develop your psychic abilities. But again, developing clairvoyance and the other clairs and ability to see spirits and so forth is a result of doing the magic and doing the work and becoming more aware of your environment on other levels and expanding the view that you have of the universe and what it contains and what the possibilities are. So it's if it's just a goal and that's all you're doing, then you're again, in my opinion, missing the point of it. So everything that we do, whether it's a small thing of making a wash, using Four Thieves vinegar to wash our floors, to planting plants in our garden, to going outside and being with nature, feeding the birds, interacting with life and the rest of life, anything that takes us out of just that one viewpoint helps to expand our understanding and our awareness of that and makes magic more real. So you're not going to, you can look up thousands of spells. You can buy that book. And it actually is in print. I saw this on somebody's shelf once and I said, hey, I'd like to get that. And he says, oh, it's not in print anymore. Yeah, he lied. He didn't want me to have it. And then I went to a bookstore and there it was. I'm like, well, okay, apparently he was wrong. It was still in print. And as far as I know, it still is. And it is a good resource if you need to get ideas about what to do and how to do it. And you have a situation you're looking at. But always remember, doing real world and real life things is your first option, and then magic is an addition to that. So that's probably enough information for one video to give you an idea. And I like real world examples because they make more sense to me because I know what I did and how I did them. And like I said, everybody's going to be different. So if you have any comments, please make them. Ask questions. I will answer all comments the best as I can, like I have been doing since people started joining the channel. And glad to have you on board. So this has been Siofra Bradigan, and this is Siofra's Magic Alcove. Blessed be.